So hi Oxys, this is Helena, your host at the Oxygen for Leadership Summit, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you are joining us from. So if you are watching live, then please feel free to join the discussion. It will be a very intense conversation, I guess, and just use the box below the screen to put your questions, ideas, feedback, and other stuff you want to share. There will be somebody monitoring the chat box, so we will certainly get back to you on your questions. If you are a VIP ticket holder, then you also have received the workbook that can help you to take notes and reflect and plan for actions on today's learnings. And if you are a VIP ticket holder, you also just provided a possibility to young South African to receive a 3-day emerging leader program. So together, we're not only leveraging our own leadership, but we also have an impact beyond ourselves, and we really love that. We have invited 4 leadership experts who will bring you their views and learnings on digital, and I'm really delighted to introduce my guests here. Let me start with Olga Martens-Stuurman from Holland. Welcome. She's based in the Netherlands and has fulfilled several global and EMEA leadership positions in HP customer support organization. Olga gained a deep insight in customer needs through more than 20 years of customer service and by managing global complex operations at scale. She is currently leading the worldwide Provide Knowledge Management organization focused on the development of global strategic knowledge management capabilities as well as operational delivery. Welcome, Olga.
Thank you.
Our second guest is Professor Satyar Baswani. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Executive Education and author of the book, Transforming the Next Generation of Leaders. He is, amongst a lot of other things, concurrently the Strategic Advisor and member of International Professional Managers Association. He is presently an Adjunct Professor of Leadership as well as member of the advisory board of Curtin Graduate School of Business in Western Australia. He is also concurrently an adjunct professor of strategy with the Paris Graduate School of Management. Welcome, Satyar.
Welcome. Thank you.
Our next guest is Doyle Buehler. He is known as the digital CEO and helps businesses become outrageously outstanding online. He is an author, entrepreneur, speaker, and online business strategist. He connects leaders to digital. Doyle has spent over 14 years in the business world in Canada, the US, Europe, and Australia, making things happen both online and offline. He is a leading innovator in the online e-commerce world and at the intersection of entrepreneurship and digital innovation. Welcome, Doyle. Very happy to have you here. And our last guest is Ravinder Singh. He is the Chief Information Officer at Tata Singapore Airlines. He's a Harvard alumnus, an award-winning technologist, a rescue pilot, an angel investor, and a global speaker with more than 100 global recognition and 17 patents. He has been acknowledged as world's top 25 CIO, top 10 robotics designer in 2019, and the #1 artificial intelligence leader in Asia. So I think we are very well equipped with a great team at our table to talk about digital. So let me ask the first question here, and it is, what is the impact of digital on today's organizations? Who wants to start?
What's the impact? To me, I think it's everything. In the digital economy, we really don't have a choice of whether we can sort of engage in the digital space or not. We're kind of committed at this point. And if you're not sort of accepting of that and you're not sort of demonstrating that leadership in that space, then it's going to quickly, I use the analogy of it's like a wave that you have to surf. And if you're not surfing it properly, it's going to push you out to sea or push you into the rocks or whatever. So now's the time, and you have to be able to embrace it. It's not going away, and you have to put an effort into it.
Yeah.
So there's no escape.
Yeah, I fully agree, Doyle. I think what is important to understand that in today's the digital transformation context at the workplace, we're talking about all activities are being business function, processes, and activities are being interconnected. And it's important to understand, so the drivers of the business transformation is all about delivering better customer experience. It's about enhancing or improving the business processes so as to provide, increase speed to market. At the end of the day, it's about profitability, enhancing the organization profitability. So I think it transcends all function, and especially today you talk about the customer centricity. Every part of the organization has to be aligned to deliver value for the customer. I think that's very important.
Thank you, Satyar. Olga, how would you define the impact on HP as an organization?
It's everywhere. Like mentioned before, it's, your employee workplaces where you want to build much more digital processes. You look at robotics, you look at automation. You want to make sure that you can be for your customers a lot more proactive versus being reactive. So I think it's not only the digital technologies that change a lot, but there is a whole culture aspect that is equally important. Are you embracing a very different way of doing business? And can you look at the world around you in a very different way? And I think that is probably the biggest challenge for many people. Technology choices are difficult, but getting the right behavior, mindsets, and activities in your organization aligned, that's a much bigger challenge.
Absolutely. Rafi, would you like to add something there?
Helena, if you actually look, two things which are very interesting, which are happening in the whole ecosystem of business or capitalism, if you look at it. One is if you look at the macro part, and especially in those economies or emerging democracies which have a very young population, where awareness is increasing exponentially, and with that, aspiration of the young workforce is increasing, and that's not an easy situation for any leadership, whether corporate or a political leadership, to deal with. So the larger macro picture, you have to create meaningful employments, and those meaningful employments are directly relevant to the readiness of industries which are digital in nature. So you can't define employment as just to have number of hours to gain or to generate bread and butter for your family, but to have some meaning in terms of creativity. That's one thing which is happening. Second thing is with the digital thing, it has suddenly become a platform game. So its speed for the first time has become core differentiator rather than the other aspects of it. They're equally important. Customer experience plus all are very, very important. But speed and speed of doing trade, how quickly you can set up businesses, how quickly you can acquire customers, how quickly you can understand those customers. These two are very, very interesting aspects which were never so much in prominence in the past era of industrialization and business.
Okay. So what does that mean for leadership? What are the key leadership challenges in leading digital transformation in the workplace?
I think one important element about leadership readiness. Are leaders ready? The current leaders and future leaders, are they ready with the competencies and skills to be able to meet those challenges in a highly disruptive, digital-driven or VUCA-driven volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity that we have seen over the past few years? That is the most important. How do we equip leaders with the right set of skills, competencies to ensure that they could effectively manage those challenges? So that's about the leadership readiness, number one. Number two is to be able to ensure the identify the right set of competency, which include, of course, the what I call the cognitive readiness, the high level of thinking skills or critical thinking skills, which leaders today need to be able to solve those complex challenges that is being created as a result of the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity of the business environment. That is one of the biggest challenges that we're going to see. More and more leaders lack of those core competencies in cognitive readiness, in emotional and social intelligence, the creative, innovative skills, which is getting more important. So that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges ensuring the readiness of the current and future leaders to prepare for those challenges.
What I've found is that there's definitely, you know, that sense of leadership in the traditional sense that, you know, it's about understanding the challenges and the culture and, you know, other sort of factors that are important. My perspective, I've taken it sort of from the side of the businesses kind of going out there day to day and how do they actually deal with what we call digital leadership. And so it's how do we actually use those in the business context? And to me, that's the most important part, because obviously I'm about business, but it's about how do we actually equip the businesses with those tools to be able to understand what's really important in what we call digital leadership. So I created what we call the 7 disciplines of digital leadership, and those are business related, but it comes down to, you know, 7 core factors that I found to be very, very important for developing successful businesses in the digital economy. Number 1, they have a digital strategy. Number 2, they have a creative content plan. Number 3, they know how to actually use and engage with the tools of social media. Number 4, they know and understand how to use branding, visuals, and videos rather, to be able to convey their messages to their audience. Number 5, they know how to align their website and their web assets with their whole ecosystem. Number 6, which we don't actually see a lot of, is do they actually have a sales process or a buyer's process to be able to understand how do we bring this audience, you know, through the whole business. And number 7, how do we actually measure this? How do we analyze? How do we amplify through advertising and that sort of thing? So if we can have these, again, what I call 7 disciplines of digital leadership, it kind of helps the businesses understand that if we can put it into a specific workflow or a specific bucket aligned with these concepts, then it actually gives you something to work for, and it sort of simplifies the job of the, you know, leading in the digital economy as well.
How do you look at leadership development and core competencies at HP in this digital age?
Yeah, I think we worked quite a lot on what we call kind of the workforce of the future, to see, okay, how do we get our people ready for the future, and all the digital acceleration is an important role in that. It's the only one, there's more elements that play, but digital connected ecosystems and many of those technical developments that are seen to accelerate are pretty important. But as mentioned before, the technology is one thing. It's more how to manage the change, how to get the right culture in place, how to get the right behaviors. That is actually much more complex. And for that, you don't need to be a whiz kid. You don't need to be digital savvy. You need to be a good storyteller. People really need to understand, why is this important? Why does this matter to my customers, to my partners, to my employees, to me? If people are convinced about the why, they will be able to change, they will be able to adopt. And I think so that education up front, that storytelling, that purpose, why you do something is important. But at the last part, it's also important, how do you accelerate adoption? Because I see with digital, beautiful things being built, and then people expect that your customers will just come, right? Hey, I built it, people will come. Not really. So you need to work a lot on the adoption, on the usage, and it's not a one-time thing. I think that is also very different from our traditional way of setting up businesses. You had this big bang, it was all perfect. Well, the digital world is different, right? So there's lots of iterations, lots of changes. The demands are, you know, changing and increasing every day. So you need to tweak, and accelerate and test and be ready to fail, because you will fail often, but you will then learn a lot and you can apply it. So I think it really requires a different mindset to be successful in digital, and that's the biggest change versus the technology change.
Most of you are focused global. You just said it is about learning how to fail and fail forward. Failing is a concept that is a lot more accessible in certain cultures or in certain places in the world. If you look at Europe, it's not a really acceptable thing. Sometimes I even saw literally on the walls, failure is no option. So how do you deal with this culture conflicts actually that arise in specific organizations?
It is interesting, right? You need to take really kind of a differentiated approach. It's not only culture, it is also looking at the different levels of people, you know, how proficient are they in certain things or not. It's also looking at education background. It's looking at age differences. So there is lots of diversity in your population that you need to address. But the most important thing for all of them is, do they feel safe to fail? If people don't feel safe, they're not going to experiment. They're not going to say, hey, I kind of failed on this. So having a safe environment, and that sounds a bit fluffy, but that people can admit that something went wrong, that something is not perfect, being able to really test out something quickly instead of making it perfect, rewarding people for taking risk. It's small little symbols that will really create the culture where people feel safe to fail and feel safe to experiment.
I'm glad you also mentioned the generational element, because digital is, at least in the perception of a lot of people, it is about, the young generations, the new generations, the tech-savvy generation, and some generations are supposed not to be like that. And I contradict that, absolutely. But how do you deal with that in organizations?
Gentlemen, you want me to answer, or are you going?
Whoever wants to go.
But I think if you're talking about the digital environment, it doesn't really, to me, cut across all generations. Of course, the Gen Y, those born between 1970 to 1980, sorry, is it 70? 1980, sorry, 1980 to 1994, and the Gen Z, those are born 95 to 2010, they are born in the internet era, so they're much more comfortable with their digital natives, so I think it's easier for them to embrace and accept, and also for them to be able to help other people in the organization of different generation. I'm a very fond of the concept of reverse mentoring, where the younger generation mentor the older generation. So I think it doesn't really matter whichever generation. I think most important, even those from Gen Y, baby boomer, they must be prepared to accept and learn, embrace change. That is the biggest challenge. How do we get the older generation, the Gen Y, the boomers, leaders to be able to accept, and that this is the new way of doing, is what Doyle talk about, the digital leadership or the leadership 4.0, which is very crucial. That the first step, it has to start with them. Olga talk about the learning organization allow people to fail, and I think that again start with the senior leadership, because you need to signal the intent that it's all right to fail. Now, in Singapore, for example, unfortunately, many organizations over the years, because from the education, from the system that we have had over the last 50 years, people, as you mentioned, Helena, that similarly in Singapore, people are not encouraged or rewarded to try, and if they fail, they'll be ostracized, they'll be condemned, criticized, and that is changing slowly. I think things are changing. I've seen a lot of organizations now slowly embracing and allowing people to experiment and create an innovative learning organization. But it starts from the top, from the CEO, from the C-suite leaders and all the head of department, to encourage such behavior. So it's about being courageous, dare to take that move to allow, empower your team to make those mistakes, if necessary. What can we learn from it? How can we make it better? So it's about coaching, empowering the people, the team. And I always advise, and my client as an executive coach, it's very important to remember in the digital age, we're talking about people before process and technology, or I call it PPT, the mantra. It's very important not to focus on technology. The technology is only an enabler. What is important to focus on the people who would make things happen. So that is the most important, I think, aspect that we need to get leaders to understand. Don't overinvest on technology, putting technology at the center of everything, but forget about the people aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, the tool is digital, right? And you have many sort of faucets that you're able to work with in terms of how does it enable it. But at the end of the day, it's not a business, right? It's not a culture. It's just an enabler, as Satyar was saying, and it's something that you need to look at. And in terms of that, like we've really have, I mean, the barrier to entry, if you look at it over the last 50 years, have like dropped like just dramatically, where anybody can compete anywhere at any time with some of the biggest global multinational corporations around the world. And that's through digital. So we have to be able to leverage that to say, look, if we can sort of have a different entry point, it comes down to the idea, it comes down to the people, it comes down to how do we actually deliver that solution or that value. And so we need to look at it from that perspective. It's like we have the process, we have the technology, let's get out and do it. And that's why you've seen sort of such a huge uptick in, startup weekends and programming fests and that sort of thing, where they design some just incredible pieces of hardware and software and whatever the case may be, because guess what? It's available. So we have to take that and scale that very, very quickly to say, hey, this is this is a great business idea, or no, this one, unfortunately probably doesn't meet a market condition or whatever the case may be. But that's what we need to look at.
So what you're saying, Doyle, and also the 7 points that you just mentioned and that are in your book, to me, it sounds very entrepreneurial. It is, like you just said, it is available to everybody, so everybody can just pick it up and start something. So what does that mean for large organizations who are suffering in installing this entrepreneurial mindset in their organizations? Do you think it's a threat for them?
I wouldn't say it's a threat, but they need to sort of engage it properly. And to me, entrepreneurialism it's a mindset, right? It doesn't matter if you're in the biggest company in the world, or a small solopreneur somewhere on some island in Indonesia, right? It's how you think about how you can solve problems and how you can help solve challenges that people are having. And that's really fundamentally what it comes down to. It's more of an intellectual exercise where, look, here's the idea, here's the problem, here's the challenge. So the big companies, they probably have even more of a competitive advantage if they obviously take advantage of it, right? But they have to understand that it's a mindset, and they have to build that culture behind it to be able to say, look, let's get a group of us and let's go do a hackathon weekend or something like that, so that they can start to develop core solutions for problems that exist and problems that don't exist, in terms of the market. So it's to me, again, it's always about the business. It's always about the entrepreneurship. You can have it anywhere. You can have it in a big company, a small company, it doesn't really matter. But how do you nurture that? How do you foster that? How do you kind of pull these ideas out that you can actually work with and grow? And to me, that's quite important.
So how do you nurture that as an organization? I'm sure that in the audience, we have leaders and future leaders. We also have HR professionals that might be interested in strategies to nurture that culture of entrepreneurship and open to this digital fast setting. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to jump in, anybody else as well. But to me, again, it comes down to that understanding of what is the challenge that we want to solve. So how do we actually assemble a team to be able to do that? And it doesn't have to be the whole corporation, immediately. Like I've worked in big corporations, and it comes down to that culture of how can we actually pull these core ideas out, and how can we nurture them. So, I mean, something has to be done deliberately. It's not just going to happen. So you have to set aside some programming, some you know, some management, project management, and that sort of thing to say, this is what we're going to do. So you can set up the framework, and then you need the people, obviously, as part of that to kind of get in and jump on board and get problem solving or whatever the case may be. So you have to, as a big corporation, you have to create those opportunities for them, create the workspace, create the, you know, the freedom of expression, the ability to have new ideas and the ability to pursue those ideas. And if you're able to create that foundation, then that's when people will become creative, and they'll be able to understand the true problems or the true challenges that people are trying to solve, and that the ones that you can actually do it as the company as well. So you have to be able to create that environment that's supportive of that. It's not just going to happen on its own.
Yeah, maybe I could share the DBS Bank in Singapore, which has been awarded the best digital bank over the last 2 years. And the CEO, Piyush Gupta, who was formerly from Citigroup, I'm sure Ravi, probably know Piyush personally, and I had an opportunity to listen to him on a couple of occasions. It's interesting the way Doyle talk about is exactly what the DBS have been successful. Create what we call a 20,000 startup, you know, with people coming together and create an environment where they allow people to experiment, to try to make it happen, and start off with one simple digital vision, which is bank less, live more, making banking more joyful so that people can enjoy doing what they do best and think less about banking. And I think they've been very successful. DBS Bank has been very successful in trying to create that culture of empowerment, the culture of allowing the teams to optimize the day-to-day operation, and you know, and getting people to be more to participate, be involved in the day-to-day decision making. So that starts from the leadership. Both the chairman and the CEO emphasize that, and continuously the consistent message is being made known. And I think the whole organization, 26,000 employees, understand that clearly, the digital vision. From there, then how does it translate into the business strategy, the human resource strategy, the technologies? Every single different business function had to be aligned to that. So, of course, for HR, the people comes in, the focus is about the skill, upskilling, reskilling, putting people, redeploying people across organization. For example, a simple example that the teller in the banking, you know, used to be the core function, and now there's been people, the bank tellers have been redeployed as more and more people go online banking and so forth. So I think that is how we start with a digital vision and articulate it clearly, that people understand what does it mean, what does it mean to me, what does it mean to my customers, and focus on customer. DBS Bank is very customer centric. That is the strategy that it works for them, and a lot of other companies are trying to learn from DBS success, being, you know, and now they've been recognized for that, being the best digital bank twice globally, you know, twice in a year. I'm sure. What do you think, Ravi? Yeah.
So Professor and Helena, you know, one of the interesting things, you know, which happens when I talk to, you know, CEOs of very large companies versus startups, and in this particular thing, as Professor was rightly saying, you know, if you are a CEO of a large company, you have this dilemma in your head, which is cost of change versus cost of compute. Okay, now that dilemma is not with the startup folks, right? Because, you know, they're born now, and for them, you know, they have this advantage of cost of compute. They don't have, whether you look on their balance sheet or you look at from the leadership perspective, they don't have to think of cost of change. And I think, you know, strong leaders, they get out of that particular dilemma pretty quickly, and they decide. And the way they decide is exactly what Professor was saying. They have a very specific purpose. So fun is a very, very specific purpose for DBS Bank. So that's the most important thing. And that traditionally has been a most sustainable part of any organization to become an institution or a large institution. I think that's where most leaders fail in terms of successful transformation. So that's one thing which I've seen. Now within startups, they have a different kind of a problem. You know, they actually start on a same scale. One of the attributes of digitization, it lowers the cost of compute, you know, whether it's cloud or anything else, or blockchain or anything else. But what it also does is that it actually creates a democratic and equilibrium. So everyone is same. So how do you differentiate yourself, you know, if you are on a platform? And then you get into this thing, hey, how do I create? So I'm working on a paper and I'm writing an algorithm, which is, you know, codification of emotion. So how do you bring digital compassion into game and all that stuff? And that's not a straightforward thing to do. And that's where the real fight, which is happening within startups. And that's how I see the whole ecosystem. And it's a remarkable example. DBS is a remarkable example that how they have kind of swallowed their ego, that even though they are a huge institution, they have to cultivate from outside this startup culture through hackathons, and then bring that into their overall, you know, cultural ecosystem, and then cultivate various different cultures, but keeping the purpose intact. It's easy to say, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. It actually tests your leadership to core.
Well, it can, because you can get into the situation where it's too much digital, right? And again, that's what we have to be careful is we have to sort of, we talked a lot about culture, and we have to talk about how can we actually make sure that we don't sort of digitalize too much, or too much automation, or, you know, whatever the case may be, because that can be trouble. Because are we actually really solving a problem, or just creating new ones as well? So we have to look at how do we actually, you know, create that ecosystem that we're trying to solve something. And we have to sort of make sure that there still is, even though it is digital, we still have to make sure that there's that humanness in it as well. Because if we miss that piece, if we miss the culture side of it, why are we solving this actual problem? Then we're creating junk, really, at the end of the day. Like you can only digitalize so much. Is you still need that that certain level of human interaction, that certain level of human condition or culture, whatever you want to call it, right? And to me, there's a point, and we kind of have to find that point of where do we maximize AI, where do we maximize, you know, digitalization, and where do we look at, you know, what involvement do we as intellects have to be able to sort of provide that solution. So we have to be able to be careful in terms of how do we actually look at this. It can't be 100% digital. It's not going to work. It's not going to solve a human problem.
Olga, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, I think what is also important, whether you're in a big company or in a small company, that you get your feedback, your customer feedback loop in from the start, and that you look at scalability from the start. Because if it's a big success, you need to be able to scale very, very quickly. And I think many people forget that, but also that feedback loop. And then really using that feedback, and not on an accurate level, because, you know, if you average everything out, you have a nice number, but it doesn't tell, again, the stories, right? It doesn't tell your customer stories. So you need to be able to look at the outliers. What are your extreme customers? What are they telling you? And can you use it to change, to improve? So looking at those stories, not looking at the averages, understanding digital metrics and digital data, because they're very different than your traditional metrics. And you will see that as soon as you shift to digital, some of your traditional metrics also really are going to change. An example is, for example, call center metrics. If you traditionally would look at what is my cost per call, if you introduce digital, and many people go to websites, you probably will end up with the most difficult calls to answer. That also means that those calls are probably much more lengthy. So your cost per call will go up, but your overall cost will go down. But if people kind of stick to the old metrics, they will say, hey, this is a really bad deal. No, but because your overall costs go down, you see. So you need to look at an end-to-end mechanism and not at individual metrics. And I think people not only need to be digital savvy, but also digital metrics savvy, because it's a very different world how to drive your business.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, Olga, because that's one of the things that's missed traditionally in business in the digital economy is that quite honestly, I see a lot of people throwing money at, getting advertising or solutions like that, where if they actually took the time to analyze it with analytics and say, okay, this is actually what's important, we need to, focus on that, because otherwise you are just wasting money. And it's actually the last step of everything we do is the advertising part, because you don't have all those pieces in place first. So if you have those pieces, great, then you can look at the analytics to make sure that everything is working, and then you can strengthen that with advertising and amplification and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a huge part, and I believe most businesses miss that part. It's like, oh, let's just throw some more money at it, see what we can do, kind of thing. But now's the time to be smart about this, to say, okay, well, how is this actually working? Is this the right metric that we're actually using, like you suggested as well?
Yeah, because volume is often mentioned, like, oh, I have so many hits. And then I always say, yeah, hits is how idiots track success. Because it doesn't really mean anything, right? Are people happy? Are they being able to self-solve? Is their business result better because you have it, not purely having, because you can drive traffic to a site very, very easy. You
show me the money.
Some money on SEO, and you can, but does it really add any value to your customers there? So I think you need to look at different things, ease of effort, duration, resolution rates. There's so many different things how you can measure really the success of your customer that is way more important than your volumes. And it's always a very interesting discussion. How do you measure success from an operational perspective, a financial perspective, and from a customer perspective? And sometimes those conflict. And what kind of choices do you make then?
I guess we're entering the area, what big mistakes can you make as a leader in times of digital transformation? There have been a few already mentioned. So what other mistakes do you see happening, and what would be your warnings for leaders and future leaders in this area?
I think it's wise to remember Marshall Goldsmith in the title of the book, "What get you here won't get you there." I think we need to start develop a strong sense of self-awareness that there would be a need to reassess, reinvent our leadership styles, our skills, develop new skills. And it's about learning agility, learn, unlearn, and relearn. I think a lot of leaders that I've met today, when I coach them, and then they discovered that a little bit too late, when they go into a digital transformation journey, that they try to implement what have worked in the past. They try to use the same style. The hierarchical leadership doesn't work anymore. It's a flat organization where you need to empower people, you need to be able to develop trust-based organization. That's very important. And you need to coach and develop, giving feedback. Especially the younger, the Gen Y and Gen Z, they expect and demand their leaders to be able to provide the instantaneous feedback, to empower them, give them, trust them to do the job. I think a lot of leaders are struggling to let go. They used to have control in whatever they do, and they need to change their leadership style. And this is what we call, and I think what I would like to call the inclusive leadership style, to embrace, from a cross-cultural diversity perspective, develop collaborative relationship across virtually, across different markets. And also, one of the things that we need to understand, the importance of emotional social intelligence, especially we talk more in the workplace, where more and more robotic, the impact of robots at the workplace. We need to be able to develop kinder people with empathy, in able to deal with each other socially. That's important, because people tend to focus on technology, they become much more lonelier. People become, and when I talk to a lot of some of these organizations that have embraced technology in a big way, especially automotive, in in industrial automation. One of the challenge when I was listening to some of the leaders, I asked them, what is the biggest challenge you're facing now? In the lack of connectivity. People are not connected to one another. So this empathy is very important. That's interesting. If you look at the technology, Olga, you're from in HP, but I look at Microsoft today. Satya Nadella is one of the greatest leaders who have demonstrated extremely high level of empathy, has transformed Microsoft phenomenally. I think Microsoft has, under his leadership, is transformed. And one of the things that he attributed is this ability to demonstrate empathy with his team. So I think this is something which is missing, and leaders need to learn quickly to reassess their leadership competency, their leadership style, their communication style with this new group, especially the younger workforce. They cannot work with the old style of paradigm of leadership. We need to be able to embrace and work with them based on the new paradigm of leadership in the, what we call the leadership 4.0.
Yeah, and
we
if we
don't
talk
have.
a bit,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Olga.
Okay, so if we talk, the question, what are some of the mistakes? I think we already mentioned some, right? Not being data savvy, not being good at scalability, making sure that you don't have a clear why you do certain things. Those are all mistakes. I think today, especially for me being from Europe, things like security, privacy are extremely important in the digital world. And that is something that customers are wanting as well, right? They want their data to be secure. They want to have privacy. So a focus on these kind of elements is really critical if you want to be successful in digital, if you don't spend time on that. So it's not only technology, it's not only culture, but it's also making sure that you know what is legally required or what is really important for your customer bases from a protection perspective. Go ahead, Doyle.
Yeah, and they're honestly, I don't find that there's any really good digital leadership frameworks, and that's kind of why I created my own, looking at the industry and what was going on in the industry to say, okay, well, I think this is kind of where people are finding success if they sort of exhibit these types of characteristics or behaviors, and to me that's one of the biggest roadblocks to understanding this whole concept of leadership in the digital space, is making sure that we actually have a framework to be able to do that. And if we can do that, I mean, like I said, I found one on my own that I find works quite well. Others may not, or may not work quite as well as they want. But the point is that we need something to create the guidelines, to create the hash marks on the playing field, to say that this is what's important and this is what we kind of need to look at and measure. I think it's like 60% of businesses, and this is pretty typical, at least between Australia and Canada and the US, 60% of businesses don't make it past the 5th year of business. And if you dig a little bit deeper, about 50% of businesses fail because they don't have a plan, they don't have a strategy, they don't know how to market. So if we sort of combine those two together, we need to look at what are we doing with leadership to be able to help these businesses build a proper, effective digital strategy, because the ones that don't have one, I mean, they try this and try that, but there's no focus and that sort of thing. So how do we actually create a more robust economy, more robust digital economy? We create a strong digital strategy that helps them through that, and we do that, we back that up with a framework of digital leadership that says these are the buckets, these are the patterns that we need to be able to look at and recognize, because if we don't, we're going to, again, as I started at the beginning, we're going to get washed out to sea if we don't know how to serve. So we have to be able to sort of engage that very quickly and get that done and useful for us.
Yeah, I think what is probably difficult for people is distinguish what is really important, right? There are so many different trends and changes everywhere. We all live change all the time. So in HP, what we normally say, kind of this surfing metaphor, like you're surfing now, so you need to be really riding the wave that you're currently on, otherwise you're flat on your face. But you need to kind of look at that second wave, because if you don't, you will be flat on your face again. But you're not just surfing on the sea for nothing, right? You have a certain goal. But you also need to look at that third point where your end goal is. And there's different directions to get there, but you cannot focus on one thing. And I think that is important in digital. You need to manage your current business well, whatever form of digitalization you have in there. You need to look at adjacent markets, your second wave, to see the opportunities, but you also need to scan the environments for what is coming, because in all three cases, if you're not alert, you're flat on your face.
And that's the strategy part
Yep.
of leadership.
It is very challenging. Ravi, how do you look at it within your organization as CIO?
This is actually not a straightforward thing. There's so many parameters. Earlier, rightly mentioned, there are so many dimensions. One is a common thing which always happen is ability to cannibalize yourself. You know, it's a very sexy thing to say. It's a very difficult thing to do. Microsoft is one of the rare examples where this large gorilla, you know, suddenly, you know, changed itself almost in every aspect of their products and services. Look, you know, if you actually look at CEOs today, and they're a little bit unfortunate because they're facing some strange kind of problem, you know, propositions. Globalization versus localization. There's no straight answer for that, you know, digital or traditional one. Digital makes it far more difficult. How do you, in a digital global environment, how do you create, you know, localization, both from a regulatory perspective or from a strategic perspective? You know, where do you build, where do you sell, and how do you take with? Privacy versus responsibility. You know, if you take privacy too far, then you lose competitive advantage. If you take the other side, then you get into the, you know, ethical framework of information and all that, you know, all that stuff. There's no straight answer to this. You know, as Doyle rightly mentioned, you know, that's why there is no specific digital framework for this. I think culture is something, you know, strategy, you know, may evolve. In fact, most companies have digital strategy. It's the culture part, you know, how nimble you are and how quickly you can change yourself. That's one thing. One particular attribute, which is a human attribute, which may, which differentiates a successful CEO today versus who are trying too hard, is do they really understand the demography of their own organization? Because, you know, where you understand information, you know, versus how a 13-year-old kid who is a customer, or a 18-year-old kid, or a 19-year-old female, how do they consume? Is something extremely interesting. And not in the leadership role, as a robotics engineer, when I test my robots, you know, trust me, you know, I am humiliated and humbled when I give my machines to younger people, and they humiliate me every time because they spend more time in dealing with devices, and they are able to understand how to use them and how to create use cases of them. If I take that in a bigger scenario of a CEO, you know, on certain use cases, they are far more comfortable in dealing with phones and machines and various kind of computational devices rather than talking to a person. I think CEOs who are able to figure that out, they are in a much better position to bring that particular change or do a storytelling with a compelling honesty than who don't understand that demographic part.
I believe there's a lot more to say about digital, and there's a lot more to learn about digital. I hope for the audience, if you have questions or feedback or your own views, just put them in the chat box, and also share this this session with other people that you feel might benefit from it. We have done also roundtables during this summit on culture. You have heard the word several times here, so there's another roundtable that might be very much aligned with this one. There's also one on agile. I guess that is also something that is very much related, or you could see very much related with digital. I'm going to wrap up here, and my last question for you is if you could like predict as visionaries, if you could predict the future, what is like your number one chance or challenge that you see on digital and on technology and leadership for the near future? What could it be?
Personally, I would say it's how do we, you know, combat fake news and that sort of, we've seen sort of through social media kind of create that sort of vacuum of whatever you want to call it, I'm not really sure, but we really kind of need to focus on how do we actually elevate that sense of digital literacy, right? How do we actually understand, how do we, solve these bigger problems of, the conversations that happen around social media. And a lot of it comes down to educating people in terms of what is, how do we actually embrace these tools? How do we actually use them for a positive communication type tool as opposed to just a, free for all. And I'm not saying we have to, decide between freedom of speech and digital technology, but we have to sort of understand that there's a certain way that we can conduct ourselves through digital literacy that says that this is important, this is a good part of a conversation and that sort of thing. Otherwise, we've just got a huge mess of whatever, people doing whatever they want. So if we can sort of elevate that with a sense of digital literacy, to me, that's where we can actually create some progress here.
Awesome, thank you. Satyar, what's your vision?
My view is that this disruption in the digital world has occurred at a very phenomenal rate. It is not going to change. It can get more intense in the next 10 years. What I like to see the change, and I believe will happen, that leaders, managers be able to leverage on technology, digital technology, to various digital platform in allowing them to be able to be a better leader, to be able to manage their team more effectively, how they can build virtual team across the globe by leveraging on technology, but always remember, which is very important. I hope the audience and people who are listening in, I think, as I said earlier, the very important to remember that people trumps technology. It's people before process and technology. If you get the people equation right, the rest will fall in place. You get the people and the culture right. That is the most important in my experience in coaching C-suite leaders, CEOs and senior leaders. This is one of the important element in the digital transformation journey of any organization that I've seen. So it doesn't matter whatever technology you use, but use them to bring about change in the organization, to deliver better value or new source of value for your customers. At the end of the day, it's about customer centricity. And how do you achieve that is to empower your people so that when you empower, first, to be honest, I always tell, start with yourself as a leader, know yourself, help your team, and develop a culture of trust, results driven. When you are able to do that, your team is able to serve the customer. Your customer transformation strategy will realize when that happens, then your organization strategy will be achieved. So it's all start with the people first and the rest will follow. So it's very important to remember that.
Thank you so much. Rafi, your last words for this roundtable?
Helena, I firmly believe in a midterm, citizen rights and citizen services will dramatically improve with digitization, and I feel that there's a huge opportunity for the first time in the history of mankind that direct democracy will appear. That means each and every person will have the right of voice and right of governance. I firmly believe that, and that will touch how companies will become far more democratic and far more open. Even if they are unwilling, they will be forced to open. So that's in the near term. In future term, just as a tech person, I think I'm not sure about it, but as a technologist, I'm confident a uniform language will appear between machines and humans and anything in between them, avatars or surrogates or something like that. And I'm in a positive mood. I think that will help. That may take away certain employments or certain definitions of employment, but it will be far more far more meaningful, far more creative, cognitive, employment and its definitions. That's my view of future.
Something to look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Olga.
I look forward to the future. I think it's really exciting. I think there's so many changes, and you can run away for it, or you can prepare for yourself for it. And I think that's the most important thing. The future is starting now, not tomorrow, not next week. It's starting now. So get ready for the future. Stay curious, stay passionate about your customers, and lead with purpose. And then I think the future looks really bright.
Okay. It's a positive message of hope and good perspective. Thank you so much for this. All of you, you were just amazing, and sharing your views was so valuable, and combining this was really a synergetic co-creation, and I loved it. And for the audience, if you loved it, then show your appreciation, give kudos. There's this upvote button to the right of your screen, so you can show your appreciation there. You can share it. You can revisit this session. You're very welcome to do that, and we really hope that you can take these learnings and roll them out in your organizations and in your professional life in general. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.